The following is a presentation of SMC TV.
Welcome to SMC TV. I'm Marshall Wilson. San Mateo County law enforcement officers are often the first to respond when someone is having a mental health crisis. Today, we're going to find out how a partnership and specialized training are helping the mentally ill. And later, we're going to learn more about our Office of Emergency Services. Right now, I'm joined by Sheriff Greg Munks,
Marshall.
Sharon Roth of the San Mateo County Mental Health Board, good morning, and Sheriff's Deputy Jim Kaufman.
Hello.
Thanks for joining me. Sheriff, many of your deputies now receive crisis intervention training. What is that?
Well, first of all, thank you, Marshall, for having us today to talk about this important topic. Crisis intervention training is a way to train our folks to deal with some of the most difficult calls that we have to respond to. Dealing with folks in crisis, dealing with individuals that have mental illness. And what we've learned over the years is that these are some of the most difficult calls. They can be chronic in nature, they can be over and over again, taking a lot of resources, they can be dangerous. They can be situations that could otherwise escalate into the use of force. And we're dealing with people that are A, mentally, suffering from mental illness, B, maybe in crisis, and C, may not know what or where to go for resources. And our deputy sheriffs and police officers in the county don't always know how to access those services. So the purpose of the training is to help our folks to, first of all, identify mental illness versus some other situation, and learn how to de-escalate the situation, and learn how to get these individuals into treatment or to rely on the resources that exist in the county so that we can try to divert them out of the criminal justice system.
And some of those resources are from, I assume, the mental health community. And Sharon, how does the training from the mental health perspective really help the mentally ill?
Well, it increases sensitivity for the officers, and they can look at a person with bizarre behavior that it may not be a criminal, but is just mentally ill and has not taken medication, is using drugs or alcohol as a means of self-medication. And we don't want the police officers to be diagnosticians, but if they can recognize a mental illness versus some other type of behavior, it would be very helpful. These are not criminals, generally.
And Jim, you've seen this training pay off in the field. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences?
Well, the first experience that comes to mind is right after our last CIT training academy. A young deputy who was assigned to the Sheriff's Transit Patrol was at the Caltrain station in Palo Alto. And after the training, he is now was a little bit more attuned to some of the symptoms of people with mental illness. And he saw a gentleman who was talking to himself or looking just a little bit off. And he walked up to him and engaged him in a conversation. And after a while, the man said that he was thinking about jumping in front of a train. And because of the CIT training, the deputy was able to see this in this man and then take the appropriate action. So the outcome of that was a non-suicide.
And that's kind of the best outcome you can hope for.
An excellent outcome.
And I've heard more and more that our jails are just being overwhelmed by the mentally ill. What's the situation, Sheriff, in San Mateo County?
Well, here in San Mateo County, it's very similar to the rest of the country. And the sad fact is that jails and prisons are the #1 treatment facilities for the mentally ill in the United States. Here in San Mateo County, 14% of the men and 22% of the women who are in custody today suffer from a diagnosed serious mental illness. And it's just not the place for people to go to get well. And that's the whole theory behind CIT. If we can try to divert these folks out of the criminal justice system early. We do have a promising program here in the county called Pathways. That's a collaboration between the courts and the DA, public defender, law enforcement, NAMI. And the idea of Pathways is to identify people early in the process, get them through the criminal justice portion of it. Generally, that involves pleading guilty to a low offense, and then as part of their probation, getting them into treatment. And that has helped a lot in terms of getting the, again, nonviolent, low-level offenders out of the criminal justice system, out of jail. Unfortunately, it doesn't help for the violent, more serious offenses, and those are the ones that are still in custody. It's very costly. It's very difficult to care for these folks. LA County, for example, the LA County Sheriff spends over $10 million a year on psychotropic drugs for people in custody in the LA County jail system.
Just on drug costs?
Just on the drugs alone. It's a sad commentary of our society.
It's the failure of the mental health system in general, and early treatment, because mental illness is definitely a treatable illness. Medications and therapies do help, and they wouldn't end up in the jail system if they were under treatment earlier on.
And then you referred to NAMI, that's the National Alliance for the Mentally Ill.
National Alliance on Mental Illness.
On mental illness, I'm sorry.
And they were very instrumental in bringing the fact that there is the CIT training throughout the country. And we've had it here in California now for about 12 years. And it's great that San Mateo is continuing with this tradition, and we thank the sheriff for that.
And how did this training come to California?
It started in Memphis, Tennessee, with Major Sam Cochran, a police officer there, and out of a shooting of somebody that had a mental illness, and realized that the police officers and really all first offenders should have training on how to deal with persons with other mental illness and other biological brain disorders. And so there's a huge curriculum, as you can see in this manual, and it covers all the major mental illnesses, many of the developmental disorders, and how to deal with people that have different behaviors.
And this is a personal issue for you.
Very personal issue. We have an ill son, and we also facilitate many programs to help support family members and friends of persons with a mental illness, because this burden goes throughout, and it covers all socioeconomic groups and many people in other ethnic communities. So.
And NAMI is a great resource for families of people with mental illness.
And they're a great partner for law enforcement.
Yeah. And this is definitely a partnership or collaboration, because without the police or the law enforcement involvement, the mental health department involvement, NAMI, and many of your local universities contribute by having instructors come that oftentimes are not paid.
And tell me a bit about the training. How long is the actual training?
Right now we have a 4-day course, 9 hours a day, a captive lunch. We don't let them go for lunch, and we have a full day of instruction with subject matter experts from the mental health community. And one of the most important parts of the training is at the very last day, well, we have 4 hours of role-playing where the officers who have taken all this information in are now tasked to use it in dealing with situations that they might encounter in the field.
And
actually, if I could interject, at one of the trainings I had the opportunity to try that device on, and we have a device virtual reality that each of the participants puts on, and it simulates the experience of someone who's suffering from mental illness, and that sees things and hears things. And so the officer or deputy that's taking the class puts this on, and it gives you a first-hand experience of what the individual that they encounter on the street might be experiencing in terms of hearing voices and seeing visual, seeing things. And it's really eye-opening.
You and I
experience.
might see a bus driver, but a person suffering from schizophrenia may see a demon. And they will react to that as opposed to someone reacting to a bus driver.
And as I understand, a lot of the training is about de-escalation. When you encounter someone who might think that they're seeing a demon, how do you go in that situation and de-escalate it?
I think the most important thing is talking. Instead of going in ablazing, go in low, slow, talk slowly, and it's amazing how much compliance you can gain from someone if you just talk to them.
Right.
And we do bring in a panel. NAMI brings in family members and consumers to talk about what it was like when we first discovered somebody had a mental illness, and various encounters, both good and bad, with law enforcement. And that's a real opening for the officers to see people that have successfully overcome their mental illness by staying on their medication or in therapy, and are now out on the job market, which is wonderful.
Well, and I know the sheriff's deputies and our local police respond to a lot of welfare checks. And often that is someone in a family is having a mental health crisis or undergoing some real trouble. If I call up and say I have someone in my home who's really undergoing a mental health problem, what can I expect when the officer arrives? One of the officers has undergone your crisis intervention training.
Well, Jim is one of those responding deputies. I'll let Jim.
Well, even before you get to the responding officer, you might be talking to a public safety dispatcher who has also had the training, because they also attend the CIT training. You'll get typically 1 or 2 police officers at your door. Is going to ask you what the situation is. Again, we'll try to low-key it at first. If a person needs to be hospitalized, and if there's a medical issue, a paramedic will be called. If there's no medical issue, we have specially trained paramedics in this county who will respond in it's an SUV, and they'll be able to bring a person suffering from mental illness directly to either our San Mateo hospital or any other mental health facility. And these paramedics are trained to deal initially with in the field crisis.
Jim, can I just say
Sure.
they have lots of other resources also, so people don't necessarily have to go to jail or to emergency psych services. They may have a case manager or some other significant other that will care for them, a caretaker.
And it's amazing, after an officer has been to a CIT program, they know that there are those other resources. So a direct trip either to jail or to the psychiatric emergency services unit may not happen. There may be some other way of dealing with this situation, and the CIT trained officers know that.
And from your perspective, I'm sure you're responsible for our jails, and as we all know, they're very, very crowded. That has to be wonderful from just an administrative perspective.
You know, it's great from a practical perspective, cost avoidance, all those things, but it's also the right thing to do. And it's the right thing to do from a compassionate standpoint of treating it as an illness as opposed to a crime. And having said all that, I mean, we still, as Jim was talking about, when we respond to these calls, they still have the potential to be dangerous. We still, and part of CIT training is to enforce officer safety and safety of the family, and unfortunately sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, sometimes it still results in an arrest, or it still escalates into a violent confrontation. But because of CIT, those instances hopefully will continue to be reduced, and we can address these chronic calls earlier in the process and get them into treatment before it just continues and escalates and ends up in a violent confrontation.
Thank you for joining us on SMC TV. I want to thank Sheriff Greg Munks, Sharon Roth of the San Mateo County Mental Health Board, and Deputy Jim Kaufman for joining us on this segment. We'll be right back to learn more about the Office of Emergency Services. Thank you.
Because I have a doctor's appointment.
Because I'll see if something's coming.
Because I've done it before.
Because I can get out of the